She was 5 years old, barefoot, and bleeding when the door slammed shut behind her forever. 10 days later, a billionaire found her watching him through a restaurant window and changed her life. Years later, she stood in an operating room, scalpel in hand, with the life of the woman who abandoned her lying open on the table. What would you do when the past returns, and mercy is the only way forward? Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The door slammed with a thunderous crack that echoed down the narrow hallway like a gunshot. Maria flinched. The heavy oak frame shook in its hinges, and the sound rang in her ears long after the silence settled. She stood barefoot on the porch, clutching a thin, torn jacket to her chest, her small hands trembling with cold and disbelief. Behind her, the porch light flickered weakly, casting her shadow down the steps like a ghost lost in time. It was midnight in New York City. The sky, a dome of smog and stars, hung silent above the tall buildings, watching. The streets below were mostly empty, the usual hum of traffic and voices replaced by a bone-deep stillness that made the air feel heavier, colder. A gust of wind raced through the alley beside the building, curling around Maria's ankles like a warning. Her bare feet touched the icy cement, already numb. From inside the apartment, her stepmother's voice rang out one final time. "Don't come back here, Maria. You're nothing but a burden." Susan's voice was sharp, metallic, and final. There was no hesitation, no regret. Only the cruel clang of truth twisted into venom. Maria didn't cry. She wanted to. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She stood still for a long moment, looking at the door, hoping it would open again. Hoping that Susan would realize she'd made a mistake, that she would pull her inside, wrap her in a blanket, and say she was sorry. But the door remained shut. The light above flickered once more, then died. She descended the steps slowly, each movement stiff with cold. The concrete bit into her heels. She had nothing with her but a faded stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, its left ear missing, its fur matted from years of love. Her mother had given it to her before she died. She used to sleep with it every night, curled around it like a lifeline. Now, it was her only companion in the dark. The city around her was not the one she knew during the day. The bright windows and cheerful honks were replaced by looming shadows and silent intersections. Garbage bags lay like sleeping beasts on the sidewalk. Storefronts were shuttered tight, graffiti scarred and hostile. In the distance, sirens howled, sharp and detached. She walked without direction, driven by instinct more than intention. Her thin coat did nothing to stop the cold. It slipped through the holes in her sleeves, through the gap in her collar, wrapping around her tiny frame like icy fingers. Her stomach growled with hunger. Her lips were cracked and pale. Still she walked. Down one street. Across another. Past glowing neon signs she couldn't read. Her vision blurred, not from tears but from exhaustion and the sting of wind. She looked into faces that passed her, but no one looked back. A man in a leather jacket glanced her way, then turned, pretending not to see. A woman clutched her handbag tighter and crossed the street. No one asked why a barefoot child wandered alone at midnight. Maria stopped in front of a convenience store. Through the glass, she saw rows of brightly colored chips and candy, a warm yellow light overhead. Her stomach twisted. She stepped forward, pressing her palm to the glass, staring at the food like it was another world. But she knew better than to try to enter. Last time she tried, a shopkeeper had chased her out, yelling about dirty street kids. So she kept walking. By the time she reached the river, the wind had picked up. She stood near the railing, the East River flowing black and endless before her. The water shimmered under the faint glow of city lights, a silver ribbon cutting through the darkness. She sat down slowly, her feet raw and bleeding. The rabbit dropped beside her, its button eye catching the moonlight. She pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them, staring out into the void. The world had grown too big, too loud, too cruel. And yet, in the crushing silence of the night, A voice echoed in her memory, soft, warm, and long gone. "No matter how cold the world gets, Maria, your heart will always know the way home." It was her mother's voice. Faint but certain. A lifeline. She closed her eyes. And then she slept. Alone. Unwanted. But not yet broken. Morning crept into the city with reluctant light, casting long, pale stripes across the cold pavement. Maria stirred beneath the bench where she had curled up, her body aching, stiff from the concrete. The rabbit was still in her arms, its fur damp from the night dew. Her legs were scraped. Her lips were dry. Her stomach churned with emptiness. She sat up slowly, blinking against the sharp, gray light of dawn. Her breath hung visibly in the air. The river still whispered behind her. The city had started to wake. Delivery trucks rumbled past, their drivers shouting into phones or radios. Joggers weaved along the path, earbuds in, eyes straight ahead. None of them saw her. Or if they did, they looked through her like she didn't exist. The hours passed. She walked again, aimless. She passed parks and playgrounds and shuttered bakeries that once smelled like cinnamon. She passed a boy her age holding his mother's hand, skipping down the sidewalk in clean sneakers. Maria's bare feet were now swollen, the skin split in places, dark with dirt and blood. She scavenged what she could. Half-eaten pretzels from a trash bin behind a deli, an apple with a bite taken out of it, still mostly good. It was disgusting, humiliating. But her body didn't care. Hunger overrode pride. She ate like an animal, quick and quiet, ducking behind dumpsters and alley walls. On the third night, it rained. She found shelter in a bus stop with a cracked plastic roof that did little to keep her dry. She curled into herself, her face buried in her knees, the stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest. The rain drummed a hollow rhythm above her, and she imagined it was music, soft and distant, like lullabies from long ago. It was the only sound that didn't hurt. Day 5 came and went in a blur. She hadn't spoken a word in 2 days. Her voice felt like a thing locked deep inside her, lost with the sound of her stepmother's last scream. When she saw her reflection in a bus window, she didn't recognize the girl staring back. Her face was thinner, her eyes sunken. Her hair hung in knots around her shoulders. She looked like a ghost of someone who used to laugh. She kept walking. On day 6, she tried to sleep on a subway train. She boarded without a ticket, pretending to be asleep when the conductor walked through. A woman noticed her and offered a protein bar. Maria accepted it with shaking hands and whispered, "Thank you." The woman smiled but said nothing. Maria didn't blame her. Pity was easier than action. By day 7, the pain in her feet had dulled into a steady throb. She limped now. The rabbit was losing fur by the hour, its stuffing exposed from a tear in its belly. But Maria refused to abandon it. It was the last piece of someone who once called her precious. She held it like others might hold faith. She saw other children, too, kids in shelters, hiding in stairwells, begging on corners. Some looked back at her with wary eyes. Others looked away, ashamed. She realized slowly she was one of them now. No different. No less invisible. Day 8, she nearly collapsed. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The sky spun above her as she sat on the curb near Times Square, eyes heavy. She thought she might sleep and never wake up. Part of her didn't care. But somewhere, buried deep in the aching hollow of her chest, was a pulse, a soft, steady rhythm that refused to stop. It kept whispering, "Keep walking. Keep walking." And so she did. Day 9 was wind and smoke and blisters. Then came day 10. She stumbled into a quieter street, far from the noise and flashing lights. Her steps were slower now, uncertain. Her legs trembled beneath her weight. She passed a large window, clear and elegant, displaying tables of white cloth and candles in glass. Inside, people laughed, their plates full of steaming food. She hadn't seen that much food in one place since before her mother died. She stopped. There, sitting by a window, was a man in a charcoal suit. He looked out just as she paused. Their eyes met. And in that single glance, something shifted in the world. She didn't know it yet, but that man would change everything. Not just her life, but who she would become. Ethan Blackwell had never been one for sentiment. He preferred numbers to people, silence to small talk, and the clean edges of polished steel to the messiness of human emotions. At 47, he had built an empire, real estate, tech investments, venture capital, but lost much along the way. His mother died when he was 19. His fiancée walked out 5 weeks before the wedding. After that, he never let anyone close enough to hurt him again. He sat alone at his usual table, a corner seat at La Rue, an upscale French bistro tucked away on 67th Street. The waiter had just placed a bowl of tomato bisque in front of him, garnished with fresh cream and chive oil, when he saw her. A child. Dirty. Thin. Pressed up against the glass. She didn't blink. Her eyes were large, hollow in the cheeks, but filled with something fierce. Hunger, yes, but also defiance. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. Her matted hair clung to her face, soaked from melting sleet. A stuffed rabbit, so tattered it was barely more than cloth, was cradled in one arm. Her feet were bare, swollen and red, standing on ice-black concrete. For a moment Ethan froze. He saw no parents, no guardians, just her, just Maria. He stood, knocking his chair back slightly. The staff looked up, startled. He ignored them, walking straight toward the entrance and out into the bitter cold. She didn't move. "Hey," he said gently, crouching so he didn't tower over her. "You all right?" She said nothing. He looked at her feet. The bleeding. The bruises. He pulled off his scarf and offered it like a peace treaty. "What's your name?" Her lips parted, cracked and dry. "Maria," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "That's a beautiful name." He gave a slight smile. "I'm Ethan." She stared. Her grip on the rabbit tightened. "Are you hungry?" A single, tiny nod. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you warm." Inside the restaurant, people stared, some in shock, others with disapproval. A barefoot, filthy child in a place like this? Unheard of. Ethan didn't care. He waved off the host, led her to his table, and called for bread, soup, and warm milk. She sat stiffly, unsure if it was real. The food came quickly. The first spoonful nearly made her cry. She ate slowly at first, then faster, driven by weeks of starvation. He said nothing, just watched. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes darted around the room, waiting for someone to yell at her, to take the food away. No one did. Ethan leaned in. "Where are your parents, Maria?" She stopped eating. "My mom, she died. A long time ago." "And your father?" "He died last year." "And your stepmother?" Her shoulders tensed. Her spoon dropped. "She told me to leave. Said I ruined everything." Her voice cracked. She locked the door. I knocked and knocked. She pressed the rabbit to her face. Ethan's heart broke. He had never adopted anyone. Never even considered being a father. He thought he was too cold, too structured, too broken to offer love to another human being. But looking at Maria now, shivering, trying to hide her tears behind a threadbare rabbit, something inside him shifted. He saw himself in her. Not in circumstance, but in pain. The kind of pain that ages you long before your time. "Maria," he said softly, "how would you feel about coming with me? Not for tonight. Not just for food. For a home." She looked up, confused. "You'd want me?" He nodded. "But I'm dirty," she whispered. "That's easy to fix. What matters is who you are. And I think," he paused, "you're someone I want to know." For the first time in days, Maria's lips twitched. Something between disbelief and the beginning of a smile. She didn't know what tomorrow held. But for the first time, she felt something she hadn't since her mother's funeral. Safe. Maria had never seen ceilings that high. The walls of Ethan's penthouse stretched upward like cathedral vaults, filled with light and strange silence. Windows ran from floor to sky, offering a panorama of Manhattan's glittering night. Everything shimmered, polished hardwood, silver fixtures, glass sculptures perched on sleek black tables. She stood frozen in the entryway, rabbit clutched in both arms, still barefoot. Her reflection in the marble floor startled her, a smudged face, wild hair, eyes ringed with fatigue. She felt like she didn't belong, like stepping farther into the room might trigger an alarm. But Ethan didn't push. He knelt beside her, eye level. "Everything here is yours too, all right? You don't have to be afraid." She nodded slowly, then looked down at her bleeding feet. "I'm getting the floor dirty." He smiled gently. "Then we'll clean the floor." He didn't ask more questions that night. He didn't lecture or probe. He ran a bath, found an old t-shirt of his she could sleep in, and brought a medic to bandage her feet. He sat with her as she ate more. Simple things like warm toast, chicken soup, slices of melon. At first, she took tiny bites, afraid to waste. Then, by the second bowl, she devoured it. He tucked her into a guest bed 3 times her size. Before he turned out the light, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Will I wake up tomorrow and be gone again?" "No," he said. "You're home now." The weeks passed like spring unfolding after a brutal winter. Maria began to laugh. Just a little at first, when Ethan made a bad joke about her stuffed rabbit being battle-scarred, or when she trounced him in Uno. She slowly opened like a flower in cautious bloom. He enrolled her in school, hired a therapist, and made sure she never went hungry again. But what surprised him most wasn't how quickly she adapted. It was how hungry she was to learn. Not just books. Everything. She asked about the stars, about how elevators worked, why people lied, what made hearts beat. One day, when she was 9, Ethan came home to find her reading an anatomy textbook, cross-legged on the living room floor. "Maria, that's college level," he said, laughing. "Where did you even find that?" "The library. The lady let me check out the grown-up section," she replied, eyes still locked on the illustration of a human heart. "It's amazing how people can fall apart, and you can put them back together." That night, he made her a promise. "If medicine is your dream," he said, "I'll get you every tool, every book, every door opened." And he did. High school came. She graduated 2 years early. She refused to let Ethan buy her a spot. Wanted to earn it. She worked harder than anyone, pouring herself into biology, chemistry, anatomy. When she was accepted to Columbia Medical School at just 19, she didn't cry. She looked out the window, silent, then whispered, "I wish my mother could see me now." Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder. "She does. Medical school broke most people. It didn't break Maria, it forged her. Late nights in anatomy labs, back-to-back rotations, surgeries that demanded hours of unbroken focus. She thrived. She stayed calm during trauma cases, performed flawlessly under pressure. Her professors called her a natural, though she knew the truth. She had studied harder, dug deeper, burned longer than anyone else. By 27, Dr. Maria Blackwell had become one of the youngest trauma surgeons ever appointed to the city's top trauma hospital. The media called her a prodigy, but she never did interviews. She never shared her past. To her, it wasn't a tale of success. It was a scar. A reminder. She didn't chase fame. She chased healing. One rainy night, as she scrubbed her hands for her 6th surgery in 18 hours, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The girl who had once been barefoot and starving was now the one people called when a life hung in the balance. She allowed herself a moment of breathless wonder. And then the intercom buzzed. "Emergency. Female, mid-50s. Severe cardiac trauma. Possible aortic rupture. Code red." She nodded to the nurse. "Prep the OR." As she pulled on her gloves, the patient's chart was placed in her hands. She froze. The name at the top stopped her heart. Susan Matthews. The world tilted. For a moment, the fluorescent light above Maria seemed to pulse too brightly, too harsh. The surgical gloves in her hands slipped from her grasp and fluttered to the sterile floor. She didn't pick them up. She stared at the patient chart in her hands as if it were written in another language. But it wasn't. The name was as plain as it had been the day she'd been cast into the streets. Susan Matthews. Her stepmother. Her tormentor. The woman who had shut the door on a 5-year-old girl at midnight and told her not to come back. Maria's heart didn't race. It slowed. Her breath came in long, controlled exhales, like a diver preparing for a deep descent. Years of surgical training had taught her to suppress emotion. But this wasn't just emotion, It was something older, darker. A bruise buried so deep in the tissue of her memory that it never fully healed. "Dr. Blackwell?" A nurse broke the silence, hesitantly. "We're ready to move the patient to the OR." Maria looked up. "I'll be there in a minute." She walked into the nearest locker room and closed the door behind her. The quiet inside felt different. Heavy. She sat on the bench, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. Slowly, the past began to rise like smoke, images, sounds, smells. That bitter night. Her tiny hand pounding on a locked door. Susan's voice snarling. "You're nothing. You ruin everything." The suffocating cold. The silence of the city. "You are not her victim anymore," Maria whispered to herself. "You are not that little girl." But the little girl was still inside her, looking up with wide, wounded eyes. Back in the prep room, Susan lay unconscious, pale and gray, her vitals barely stable. The scans showed a severe rupture near the aortic arch. The damage was massive. If she didn't get into surgery within the hour, she would die. A resident turned to Maria as she entered, fully scrubbed now. "You're leading this one, right?" Maria hesitated. She could say no. She could step aside, let someone else take her place, walk away and never speak of this again. But a voice in her memory stopped her. Ethan's voice, steady and resolute. "The strength to save someone who hurt you? That's not weakness, Maria. That's power. That's mercy." She took the chart from the resident. "I'll do it," she said. In the OR, her hands were steady, her face expressionless, her voice composed. Scalpel. She made the first incision with the precision of a master, layer by layer, flesh to muscle, muscle to bone. Every movement was deliberate, detached. The surgical team worked around her in silence, sensing the weight in the air. As she reached the aorta, the rupture bled fast and violent. One wrong stitch, one moment of hesitation, and Susan would be gone. But Maria didn't flinch. She clamped, cut, sutured. She worked like a storm within a steel box, contained, powerful, devastating. And then it was done. She stepped back from the table. "She'll live," she said simply. And then she walked out. In the hallway, Maria leaned against the cold wall outside the OR. Her gloves were off. Her hands shook now, but not from fear, from release. She had saved the life of the woman who tried to destroy hers. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Not because she deserved it, but because I did." Susan Matthews awoke in a fog of morphine and beeping monitors. The scent of antiseptic clung to her skin, her chest tight beneath layers of bandages. A dull ache pulsed beneath her sternum, like something heavy had been removed and barely stitched back together. The ceiling above her was flat and sterile white. She blinked at it slowly, disoriented, trying to place where she was. Every breath felt borrowed. A nurse leaned over her, adjusting the 4-drip. "You're at St. Anne's Medical," she said gently. "You had emergency cardiac surgery. Aortic rupture. You're very lucky. If you'd arrived 10 minutes later." Susan tried to speak, but her throat rasped like sandpaper. "Who?" The nurse smiled. "Your lead surgeon was Dr. Maria Blackwell. One of the best we have. She saved your life." The name drifted past Susan like a feather on the wind. It didn't stick. Not at first. She closed her eyes. Maria Blackwell. She didn't know anyone by that name. Later, alone in the dim hush of recovery, Susan's eyes wandered across the room. A clipboard lay at the foot of her bed, her name neatly typed on a plastic tag. Nearby, on a tray, was a small envelope, standard post-op paperwork, most likely. She reached for it with slow, trembling fingers. Inside was a thank you card. The hospital gave them to patients sometimes, an unnecessary, glossy gesture. On the front it read, "You were in good hands." She opened it lazily, more out of boredom than interest. Inside, it was signed by her surgical team, Dr. Ellis, Nurse Rena, Dr. Chong. And at the bottom, in neat cursive, Dr. Maria Blackwell. Beneath it, stapled loosely to the inside flap, was a staff photo. Probably promotional. A group of surgeons in scrubs, arms folded, smiling professionally under the bright lights of the OR. Susan's eyes skimmed the faces, then stopped. Third from the left. A woman, young, late 20s. Her dark hair pulled back, cheekbones sharp, gaze steady and impossibly familiar. But it was the eyes that held her. Wide. Piercing. Haunted. Susan's heart skipped, not from weakness, but from memory. A cold street. A child's eyes staring through a locked door. A voice small and shaking. "Please don't shut the door." She stared at the photo. Her fingers trembled. It couldn't be. She read the name again. Maria. No last name when she was a girl. Just Maria. The girl she abandoned. The girl she had broken. Now, Dr. Maria Blackwell. And she had held Susan's life in her hands. Susan let the photo fall to her lap. The room spun. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Not just luck. Not just skill. The child I threw away saved me." Later that evening, Maria stood outside the recovery room, staring through the glass at the woman lying pale and bruised in the hospital bed. The machines kept Susan alive, humming a strange harmony to the silence Maria had known all her life. She could walk away, leave her like Susan had once left her. But something inside her whispered, "Finish it." She entered. The sound of the door opening made Susan turn her head. Their eyes met. It was like staring across decades of wreckage. Susan's lips trembled. Her voice came in a whisper. "Maria?" Maria didn't answer. Susan's eyes filled with something Maria hadn't seen in them before. Not cruelty. Not disgust. Fear. And something even more fragile, shame. "You saved me." Maria's voice was cool. Flat. "Yes." "Why?" Maria stepped closer. Her hands were at her sides, still strong, still steady. "Because I took an oath. Because I'm a surgeon. Because someone raised me to believe in mercy." Susan swallowed hard. I didn't recognize you. I didn't know. You never looked at me long enough to know me," Maria said softly. "Not when I was a child. Not when you left me to die on a sidewalk." A long silence fell between them. Tears rolled down Susan's cheeks. "I was angry. Lost. Your father, he died and I blamed you. I was wrong. I was cruel. I've thought about it every day. Wondered what happened to you. You didn't wonder enough to find me. I was a coward." Maria's eyes didn't waver. "Yes." Susan sobbed then, helpless and broken, a woman no longer wrapped in power or bitterness, just illness and age and remorse. "Can you forgive me?" Maria's hands curled slightly. She felt the old ache rise. The sting of hunger, the shame of sleeping on cardboard, the years of therapy it took to stop waking up screaming. But she also felt the warmth of Ethan's hand on her shoulder the day she became a doctor. The sound of applause when she gave her first lecture. The quiet power of standing where no one had expected her to stand. She breathed. "I already did," she said. "The second I walked into that operating room, I forgave you." Susan's sobs quieted. "But forgiveness," Maria continued, "doesn't mean reconciliation." Susan looked up, confused. "I saved your life," Maria said. "Not because I want a relationship, but because I want peace. I don't hate you. I just don't need you anymore." Her voice didn't shake. Her spine didn't bend. She had found her closure not in revenge, but in healing. She turned toward the door. "Goodbye, Susan." And then she left, her steps sure, her head high, like a ghost finally laying itself to rest. The city skyline shimmered as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the buildings in molten gold. Maria stood on the rooftop garden of the hospital, arms crossed, a light breeze tugging at her hair. The hum of traffic far below was distant, like the ghost of a world she no longer belonged to. She had saved her stepmother's life. And now she was alone with that truth. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just still. The adrenaline had faded. The steel of the operating room had given way to the ache in her chest, the echo of old wounds that still lived under her skin, soft as breath, sharp as bone. She closed her eyes. She was 5 again in her mind. Cold. Shivering. Watching a door close that she still dreamed about. She remembered how she used to imagine turning into fire. Not just to warm herself, but to burn through the world, to melt away the pain. But she hadn't become fire. She had become a scalpel. Precise, clean, controlled. A tool not for destruction, but for healing. And healing wasn't just what she did in the ore. It was who she had become. It was what had made her human again. She sat on the edge of a planter filled with rosemary and lavender, herbs they used to calm the pediatric cancer patients. The scent reminded her of the garden Ethan had once planted on their terrace, just so she could learn how things grew. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the stuffed rabbit. Its fur was faded to gray, one eye missing, the seams barely holding. She never carried it at work, but today, she had needed to remember where she came from. She turned it in her hands. "You see?" she whispered, smiling faintly. "We made it." Behind her, the rooftop door opened. Footsteps. Familiar. Ethan's voice. "They told me you were up here." She didn't turn. She asked for forgiveness. He moved to stand beside her. "Anne, I gave it to her." He said nothing for a moment. Just looked out at the skyline with her. Then, "Are you all right?" Maria nodded, but not right away. "I thought I'd feel relief," she said. "Or justice. But mostly, I feel quiet. Like something I've been carrying forever just fell off and hit the floor." Ethan smiled gently. "That's peace. Doesn't always come with fireworks." "I didn't do it for her," she added. "I did it so I wouldn't become her. So I wouldn't carry that bitterness into every room I walk into." "You chose mercy." "I chose myself." They stood there in silence as the sky turned purple and the lights of the city blinked on, one by one, like stars returning to Earth. Maria didn't cry. Not because she didn't feel, but because for once she didn't have to. The war inside her had ended. She had won. The hospital discharge papers sat untouched at the edge of the desk. Maria stood beside the window of her office, watching raindrops streak the glass like veins. Below, the city moved in its usual chaotic rhythm, cabs honking, umbrellas clashing, steam rising from vents like smoke from old ghosts. Susan would be discharged tomorrow. She had asked, twice now, to see Maria again. Maria declined, not out of cruelty, but out of something harder to define. Boundaries, healing, preservation. The world expected that forgiveness should end in a hug, a reunion, a fresh start. But Maria had learned something most people never do. You can forgive someone without ever letting them back in. The next morning, she visited Susan's room one last time before the discharge nurse arrived. Susan looked older, smaller, like a house once grand now stripped bare. When Maria entered, Susan smiled with something between gratitude and regret. "I didn't think you'd come. I'm not staying." Susan's face fell, but she didn't argue. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "You gave me something I didn't deserve." "No," Maria replied gently. "I gave me something I deserved. Peace." Susan swallowed, struggling to speak. "I've lost everything. My health, my job, my pride. But knowing you became this," she gestured to Maria's white coat, her badge. "It makes me think maybe I didn't break you completely." "You didn't," Maria said. "But I had to build myself from the ruins." A long pause. Susan's voice cracked. "Do you think one day we could talk again?" Maria looked at her for a long time. And then quietly, "No." Susan blinked. "I understand." Maria stepped forward, gently placing something on the table beside the bed. It was the stuffed rabbit, the one that had survived 10 days on the street. The one Maria had clung to in a city that had tried to swallow her. "Keep it," she said. "It's not mine anymore." Susan reached for it, tears pooling in her eyes. Maria walked away. Outside, Ethan was waiting beside the hospital elevator. He looked up as she approached. "All done?" he asked. She nodded. He held up 2 coffee cups. "I thought maybe we'd drive north. Find somewhere with trees and no cell service." "For how long?" she asked. "As long as we need." She smiled. "I like the sound of that." They rode the elevator down in silence, standing shoulder to shoulder. When the doors opened, Maria stepped out into the crisp spring air. Not as a survivor, or even a doctor, but as someone free. The past hadn't disappeared. but it no longer defined her. And as she walked into the world she'd carved for herself, she knew the truth. She hadn't just escaped the darkness. She had outshone it. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.